To the mind, it is always gonna be incomprehensible that it one day shall be no more. In case one wants to use this for their own advantage and, rule humanity or a mass of people, this can easily be turned around. This can be easily turned into a piece to rule people, because keeping people in ignorance is paramount. If you ever want to rule any certain race, be sure to find out what the utmost level of ignorance for that race is. And if you have achieved that, the point is exploit all their insecurities. Now, this obviously, to the narcissistic mind, is a great, or better said, the best insecurity. Because the point is, the more traumatized someone is, the more somewhat narcissistic and or sociopathic they may become. Surely there are other ways, the mind can break, and there are different levels of madness to this universe. But when it is about death, it is considered the most intriguing aspect, the most intriguing factor of the mind. When you look at any ignorant person, the one of the common features they have is a perception or a belief, but it's not actually a belief, it's more like a state of existence in which they feel immortal. Now, why I didn't call it a belief is because a belief is something one earns, one gets from other people, right? All beliefs that you have, they came from somewhere, or they were triggered within you based on your logics, but they still had a external stimulus, or stimuli if it were plural. Because what ultimately a belief means is accepting something without using your discernment or without the necessity for proof. So you can't accept something if it is already within you. When it is within you, it means you have already accepted it. When it comes to the mind, it is incomprehensible to it that one day it shall be no longer, because the mind is only a tool. It is a tool for survival, and survival is the opposite of perishing, of being no longer. And once you have a tool whose sole purpose is to survive, therefore accumulate any data necessary for one's survival, well, that one, if you don't learn how to use, can easily be turned against you. Because just as easily as one creates thoughts to support themselves, they can also end up on the opposite spectrum, creating things to, disallow themselves from simply living well, right? When you end up thinking all the bad things, right? That you're not worthy of your attention, and shame and guilt are part of your natural life processes, well, that is when you have become mentally poisoned. Add to that the aspect of religion, well, you're gonna live a very tormented life, and, well, we can say humanity has lived a tremendous amount of generations of such, karmic suffering, right? How mind reaches the idea of religion? Well, it is very simple. The mind is just a tool for creation. It will create. It will always create. That is why you cannot silence the mind. The mind can only be silenced when you perish. And that's the only way. That's the only moment when it will be silenced. The mind can also be somewhat silenced through accepting all the thoughts that go through your mind without giving them any meaning, without judging them, without labeling them, because that means adding them a bit of meaning. And this process has to not be forced. When the mind reaches the aspect that one day it will be no longer, because that's always a shock for most people, because most people are ignorant, and ignorance don't have any sense about the world and their environment and the rules that life follows in its cycles of existence. And they're not knowledgeable of the fact that each and every moment they live is basically them being closer to their grave. And usually they realize that when they are extremely old. And that's the moment when they become even worse in terms of personality. They become more aggressive. They become more toxic and the such, just because of this fear. But the fear of no longer being has been so greatly amplified by religious beliefs that you will be punished, you will be tormented for what you have done, right? The greatest flaw in religions is the idea of forgiveness, because religions pinpoint this useless term. Now, forgiving people is technically a useless term because you can forgive them for what they have done, but the question is, why would you in a way, right? Because whatever they have done, it was done either out of not knowing something or because of ignorance, right? They got pissed off, they couldn't withhold the impulse, and they did you something bad, right? The point is, the only thing you can actually uh, forgive in a way is you and your own um, reactions towards that person. But ultimately, it is still somewhat irrelevant because if you did know better, you would simply not have acted that way, right? If they did know better, they wouldn't have acted that way. And well, you can call forgiveness a way of, making peace with the past, but ultimately you don't need to give it a certain term. Because when you give meaning to things, people will automatically demand that, right? So many people demand that forgiveness from you, right? Or they want you to do things for them, right? So that they forgive you. This is a kind of blackmail, right? And this can be always exploited, right? So when the mind is left, is actually given all the freedom to create all so many things, right? And also, those meanings that are created upon, the moment they are given importance, right, by the mind, then you as a being are lost. You basically are a dead being. Because when you give meaning to literally everything, you are no longer alive. Your mind is simply wandering in all directions, and you're always going to be focusing on the past or on the present. You're no longer going to be focusing on you. And in a society where everything works on the principle of problem, reaction, solution, well, you're definitely gonna be far more lost. Because when you have problems, you want solutions, but solutions are also gonna be given, right, by the same party. And, well, to that level to be reached, you also must react. Because how can one react, right? You will only be reacting in fear, right? You'll only be reacting in pain, suffering, right? Shame, guilt, and all these lower vibrations are needed to preserve some forces in this universe, right? Those forces belong to the realm of madness. Whatever way you put it, they belong to the realm of madness. Now, the realm of madness has all the possible ways that the mental body can break, and obviously all the possible ways the energies of your body can react to such, traumas, right? One of them is the idea of incomprehensibility of death, right? Death is part of a life cycle. Everything that is physical in this world ends sooner or later. Now, the point is, ignorant people are not aware of this, and that can be easily used to rule them or to pull them out of their ignorance. So, the point about death is it is simply gonna come. You will know 100% that it comes. You don't know when. And that is the frustrating fact for the mind. That one day you are here, one moment you are here, and the next very moment you can no longer be. And they believe that death will be that traumatizing, separation of the body. And it is funny that in a world where we are calling ourselves civilized, the fear of a inexistent god is among the greatest fears in this world. This shows how sick this world has become. So, the point about death is it is just a change. The point about everything that is physical is that is feeble, and it will reach a moment when it can no longer house life. So, why not leave the body and come back here in this world if you still have karmic cycles to complete, but at least come in a different body, in a new body, to experience things in a better way. Because when you are ignorant, the only thing you can do is break your body. That is how most people die anyways. they break their body some way. Accidents, or they simply, make their body sick and more sick and more sick. When you let your mind wander, it will one day reach this incomprehensible wall that, it cannot pierce beyond. Because the mind is only a tool for survival. It is never, ever gonna be capable of perceiving things beyond survival. That is why love is also incomprehensible to the mind. But in a superficial world like this, love doesn't mean anything else than sex, because sex is an aspect of survival. It is an aspect of the survival of the race, and the survival of the race also includes the survival of the individual as well. So it also includes the survival on the social level, because in order to end up having sex, you need another individual. So when it comes to letting the mind create literally anything, it will try to simply bypass death, but it will most likely bump into the reality that, it cannot. Obviously, it will run away from that because the mind was not meant as a truth accepting machine. So simply the moment when the mind sees that it cannot circumvent death, it will try to jump into, the psychiatric aspect, as I call it. Or technically, it will try to create all sorts of illusions in which, it lives in worlds where it doesn't die and it remains the same. And that's how more or less heavens will be created, right? A place where there is no pain, there is no suffering, because ultimately that is what the mind seeks, right? You seek ultimate well-being. But the point is, you are afraid of death. You are afraid of, pain and suffering and shame and guilt. But what is it that religions actually support, right? You won't see religion and Christianity as a tool for your salvation. They are just tools of, subjugation. Because you're born to live in shame and guilt. Your sexuality is poison, right? Everything is poison about you. If you're, even women have been looked at as inferior throughout many of these single god religions, right? Because any single god religion, funnily speaking, always ends up as, supporting the male gender. This is what happens when you let your mind take control of you instead of you taking the responsibility to use your mind for own well-being and as well as the well-being of the others. All this being said, you are appreciated. Take care of yourselves. Ferenc on board signing out.